This is Chapter 9, Section 3, Rise of Feudal Monarchies. Your objectives for this section are give the reasons for the development of English Parliament, and you should be able to explain the growth of royal power in France. Okay, so the first country that we're going to talk about is England and how a monarchy is established there. If you remember when we studied the Roman Empire reached all the way into Britain. There had been Roman rulers, Roman authority present in Britain. But after the early 5th century, that Roman authority is gone. They are no longer ruling over the Celts. You have Germanic tribes, so it's just mirroring everything that's been going on in Europe that we've talked about before. You have Germanic tribes, the Angles and the Saxons invading Britain. Remember when we talked about the fall of the Roman Empire and all these different tribes going to different areas. The Angles and the Saxons invade Britain, and it becomes Angleland, and that's where you get England from. Okay, during the 9th century, we also have the Danes, which we would, call them Vikings. They are starting to raid the land of Britain. So they're coming into conflict with the Angles and the Saxons. And we have King Alfred the Great. He's the ruler of Wessex, which is an area, and you can see it there on the map, of Britain. He defeats these Vikings, and so he ends up ruling over, I guess you'd say, not a majority, but he's the ruler that has the most territory in England at that time. And so he establishes the foundation for a unified English monarchy. Okay, so King Alfred gets this name, the Great, for more than just getting rid of the Vikings. He establishes a military class, so kind of all of these knights we've talked about before that are ready to go to battle at any time in order to protect the kingdom from the Vikings. He builds forts along the coast to defend against Viking raiders. He's known as the founder of the British Navy because he is going to help build a navy again to help defend against the Viking raiders. He strengthens the practice of local government, and these are things that are important when we look towards U.S. history. This is a heritage that America takes from English settlers that come over here to colonize. He divides his territory up into shires, or you could think of them as counties, and these are governed by officials called shire reeves, and this is where you get the term sheriff from. He will kind of commission monks to compile the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is a history of England. And so for all of these different things, he's referred to as Alfred the Great, and you can see there's a statue there of him that's in England today. So after Alfred dies, England's going to fall, though, to a Danish ruler named Canute. And so they'll be ruled by Danes for a brief time in their history, but eventually, after Canute dies, they're able to drive out the Danish rulers, and they replace them with Edward the Confessor. Okay. After Edward the Confessor dies, he has not left a direct heir to the throne. So he hasn't left a son or named anyone heir to the throne. So now this is when conflict is going to arise. And you have William, the French Duke of Normandy, saying that he has a claim to the throne, that Edward the Confessor had promised him the throne. The English nobles that live in England, though, disagree, and they elect instead to have Harold, who's the Earl of Wessex, to have him become king. And so now there's going to be this great battle over the throne. So on October 14th of 1066, we have the Battle of Hastings, and you do need to know that actual year. You don't need to know the exact date, just the year, 1066. A reason why this is an important date is because it changes the course of English history. So rather than have someone that is of the Anglo-Saxon, okay, those tribes, that heritage ruling England, they are defeated. Harold is killed in this battle, and William, the Duke of Normandy, becomes William the Conqueror, and he establishes a new line of English kings, and this will be the Norman dynasty. And so if you ever study like language, you'll see that there's a lot of English words that actually have a French or a Norman French influence, and it comes from this time when William the Conqueror became King of England. So William the Conqueror is going to create, there's going to be centralized feudalism all over the entire country of England. So he is the main lord, that's what that means, and then everybody else is a vassal to William the Conqueror. So all the vassals are required to swear allegiance to him. He will appoint the bishops, so he's kind of practicing lay investiture, which we've talked about before. And now that he is King of England, he wants to know what all of the resources are that he can tax in his new kingdom that he has. So he commissions a survey of the land to be taken, and it is recorded in this book called the Doomsday Book. I know if you hear Doomsday, you're thinking like apocalypse. No, the Doomsday Book is just comes from the word for like the judgment of the king. So this is a judgment of the king over, like a census over everything that he can tax. Okay, so William's sons, William II and Henry I, die without heirs as well. And so the Norman line comes to an end. And then finally the crown ends up being passed down to the Plantagenet family. And Henry II, who is the great-grandson of William the Conqueror, becomes King of England. Henry actually has more land and more wealth outside of England than he does within it because he's a Frenchman. He's from France. So he has a lot of land in France. He actually has more land than the King of France that he's gained through marriage and through his inheritance. And so in a way, he kind of thinks that he should be King of France as well. And so this provokes this rivalry between the throne of England and the throne of France that will continue for many of hundreds of years. Okay, Henry's going to strengthen the authority of the king in England. He expands the jurisdiction of royal court, so meaning like the area where the royal court can have a say or make the judgment. And that's not just territorial, it could be over issues as well, what the royal court is allowed to have a say in. He established circuit courts, and these were like traveling justices or traveling judges who would go around the country to hear cases. So groups of men would get together and they would prepare indictments or accusations, that's what an indictment is, before the justice would arrive, and then the justice would hear that case. And this is the basis for modern juries, are these groups of men that would get together to prepare the accusations. And so because the justices are kind of going around and they're creating a standard for the law, this helps develop the common law that all the English people are going to obey, and kind of draws them together. And it is, again, a part of that English heritage that we have in our own law here in America. Okay, Henry, again, also kind of practicing lay investiture, appoints Thomas à Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, which is a very high church office in the country of England. But him and Thomas are going to become bitter rivals, and he'll actually make this comment at court. Henry will make this comment at court: "What a pack of fools and cowards I have nourished in my house, that not one of them will avenge me of this turbulent priest." And so pretty much he's just asking his knights to go and murder Becket. So 4 knights go out to kind of avenge the king, to kind of hopefully win the king's favor, and they murder Becket. But the majority of the country, the citizens, there's this popular uproar over his death. They're really angry that the archbishop, has been murdered. And so pretty much this leads Henry to kind of take back what he said, and he's not going to try to control the clergy anymore. And so Thomas à Becket's tomb it becomes a popular shrine. He's seen as a martyr. In the Canterbury Tales, that's a story about pilgrims traveling to go see his shrine, his tomb. Okay, so after Henry's death, his oldest son becomes king, and that's Richard I. He's known as Richard the Lionhearted. If you've seen any Robin Hood movies, you see this kind of fictionalized version of Richard I. And his brother, King John. Richard I, though, is not like the best king. He's a warrior. He doesn't really spend a lot of time in England. He is out on crusade for most of his 10-year reign. He's actually only in England for less than 6 months of his 10-year reign. But the people of England kind of look up to him, and they kind of idolize him, and he's kind of a hero figure. But while he's gone, his brother John is really the one that's ruling over England, and his brother John actually plots with the King of France to take over his brother's throne. And that's why you kind of always see King John as like the bad guy in all of the Robin Hood movies. Finally, when Richard does die, John does become king. He's actually not that bad of a king. He's a much more able ruler than his brother. But people don't really trust him. They don't really admire him. They think that he is cruel and weak. And he's constantly at conflict with 3 different opponents. He's at conflict with the king, the French king. He's in conflict with the Pope and with the English nobles who don't really like him. Because of his conflict with the Pope, England is actually placed under interdict for some time. Remember, interdict is one of the weapons of the church where they don't give any of the sacraments minus baptism and last rites in an area. And so again, you're going to have the people being very upset with King John because interdict has been exercised over England. Okay, so finally you have the English barons being very, very upset with John's reign. They're not happy. They don't like his taxes. Remember when you see the Robin Hood movies that everyone's, very poor and they're being taxed all the time. And so in 1215, and this is an important year you need to know and associate with this document, in 1215 the nobles revolt against him and they force him to set his seal, or pretty much sign, the Magna Carta, which is the Great Charter. So 1215 Magna Carta, very, very important. And pretty much what it says is that the king's power is limited. He is accountable to the law. He can't just do whatever he wants. And this is going to be a reason why the English monarchy is very different from the French monarchy when we get when we begin to talk about France. Okay, so now we get to the reign of Edward I. He's one of England's most gifted kings. He really tries to kind of unify Britain and extend his rule over Wales, Scotland, and England. He makes his son the Prince of Wales, which is a reason why the son that's next in line for the throne is given that title, the Prince of Wales. So Prince William's father is the Prince of Wales. And then once he becomes king, after the Queen has passed away, then Prince William will become the Prince of Wales. So Edward I's most important contribution was the development of Parliament. So this was came from a tradition of English kings seeking counsel. The Anglo-Saxon kings had this group called the Witan, which was an assembly of men in the kingdom that they would get advice from. William the Conqueror had the Great Council, or the Curia Regis, which was a body composed of his top nobles or chief vassals that would also give him advice. So Edward kind of just takes this model and he expands the membership to include knights from every shire or county and representatives from every town. And so this is the model parliament. It's the first parliament. Beginning in the 14th century, Parliament begins to meet in two separate groups. So the chief vassals will be the foundation of the House of Lords, and then the knights and the citizens from the different towns would become the House of Commons. And the king needed Parliament's approval to collect taxes, and this is known as the power of the purse. So Parliament can pretty much show its dislike of things or disapproval of things that the king is doing by withholding his ability to collect taxes. And so they have that control because they have the control over the king's money. Okay, moving into the section on France. We have the Capetians and their royal house. The Count of Paris, Hugh Capet, is chosen by lords to become king of France in 987. And for over 300 years, everyone has an heir. There's always a son to take his father's place on the throne. And as their domain grows, there's more knights because there's more vassals that are added to the French forces, and so their power grows, and kind of the nation of France becomes much stronger. They develop a centralized government, and they ally themselves with the Roman Catholic Church and the townspeople. Okay, even though the Capetian kings were named king, they actually only ruled this very small area around the city of Paris known as the Ile-de-France, and it was like an island. And that picture there, you see that little red territory, that's the Ile-de-France. And a lot of the vassals of the kings of France had more money and more power than the king himself. So, for example, William the Conqueror had more wealth than the king of France. But he was not the king of France. He was just a duke. Okay, it's not really until Philip II that you see someone really become known as the founder of France. He's referred to as the Augustus. And really, one of their chief obstacles for the French kings is the amount of land that's held by English kings in France. And again, this is a part of the rivalry between the two countries. If you know the story of Joan of Arc, that's a part of the reason why they're at war with England at that time. And so they're kind of always fighting. Philip II has a lot of power over King John. John will not... Well, technically, John is one of Philip's vassals. He refuses to stand trial in Philip's court. And so he technically forfeits his French land. So that kind of helps France with their issue of English monarchs owning too much land in their country. Philip helps to increase the effectiveness of royal government. He replaces the feudal officials with new royal ones called baillis or bailiffs. And they're appointed by him, they're paid by him. Their job is pretty much to enforce his taxes and feudal rights. They administer justice, so they're kind of like medieval police in a way. Okay. Then we get to Louis the Ninth. Louis the Ninth is called the ideal medieval king. He just wants to have a very peaceful and just rule. He wants to protect the rights of all his citizens. He will further expand the royal court's jurisdiction, so you kind of just see that building from king to king, that they're expanding the rule and the authority of the French monarchy. He appoints special men to search out abuses in the royal government. So it's similar to the Missi Dominici that you guys studied before, that were the king's messengers. And so Louis IX becomes known as the French Justinian. He leads 2 crusades against Muslims in North Africa. Both of them are failures, and he dies during the Second Crusade. But he'll become known as St. Louis. Okay, and we finally get to Philip IV. Philip is known as the Fair. Fair then refers to someone being handsome. He further expands royal power in France, strengthens the organization and authority of the central government. France is able to collect more revenue than before because he taxes the French people like no other king before him ever had. He also taxes the French clergy. The Pope, Boniface VIII, steps in and tells him that the king cannot impose a tax on clergy, that they should be outside of that. But Philip pretty much doesn't listen to the Pope, even though the Pope threatens to have him excommunicated. And we see the people's loyalties start to shift away from the church and start to be tied more to the king than the church. So in order to help his policies become more popular, Philip decides to create an advisory body, kind of like Parliament, except that the Estates General, the group that he creates, doesn't really have as much power as Parliament. They don't have the power of the purse, and this is why France becomes an absolute monarchy while England is a limited monarchy. So he could get advice from the Estates General, but the French king didn't have to listen to them. And there was no Magna Carta in France that said that his power was limited, and that's where you get that absolute monarchy from. Here's your paragraph shrink words. You have 4. You can choose to throw one of those out if you need to. Bonus points if you can use all 4. So your SRQ questions. What man defeated the Danes and laid the foundation for a unified English monarchy? What 2 men struggled for the English throne in 1066? What was the name of the battle where the issue was settled? On what document did English nobles force King John to affix his seal? In what year did this take place? What ruling family came to power in France? Following the last of the Carolingian monarchs, list 5 kings in this section who belong to this royal family. And 5, list the English and the French advisory representative assemblies that developed during this period and identify each with its respective country. Reminders, you have a quiz tomorrow, meaning Tuesday. Take your notes. Don't forget to be taking your notes when you listen to the lectures. And your final exam is going to be next Wednesday, so pick up all of your graded notes and tests from your folder so you can start studying from them, and I will have a study guide up on Course Sites for you this week.